A starving mother dog collapsed in the snow on a lonely road outside Flagstaff. Her body curled around a tiny puppy barely breathing beneath her. She wasn't just freezing. Someone had tried to erase them both. The only person who noticed before it was too late was a former Navy SEAL driving through the storm. When he brought them to a veterinarian, a hidden chip inside the puppy revealed something no one expected. A classified military program that had turned loyal dogs into experiments. And the mother hadn't run to save herself. She had escaped a secret facility to save her child. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And if you believe courage sometimes comes on 4 paws, subscribe, because this story may restore your faith in miracles. Snow fell thick and silent over the pine forests outside Flagstaff, Arizona, turning the mountain road into a pale ribbon, disappearing into darkness. Nathan Cole drove slowly through the storm, his truck headlights cutting 2 narrow tunnels through the blowing snow. At 42, Nathan carried the quiet, weathered look of a man who had spent too many years in places where survival depended on silence and sharp instincts. His face was angular and rough-cut, framed by a short dark beard that had begun to show threads of gray. Deep lines ran from the corners of his eyes, carved there by desert sun, ocean wind, and the hard weight of memory. Once, Nathan had been a Navy SEAL, one of the men sent into the shadows when the world needed something done quietly. A roadside bomb in Afghanistan had shattered his left knee and ended that life. The doctors repaired the bone, but not the rest of him. Since then, he had lived in a small cabin outside Flagstaff, speaking more often to the forest than to people. The snowstorm that night had been forecast to arrive late, but mountain weather obeyed no one. Nathan's gloved hands tightened on the steering wheel as wind pushed against the truck. The road ahead twisted through tall ponderosa pines, their branches bending under the growing weight of snow. That was when he saw movement. At first, he thought it was a fallen branch rolling across the road. Then the headlights caught a shape, low to the ground, dark against the white. Nathan slowed the truck and leaned forward slightly, his instincts sharpening the way they always had in dangerous places. A dog, not just any dog. A large, shepherd-type female, perhaps 3 or 4 years old, stood in the middle of the road. Her coat was once a rich blend of sable black and deep brown, but now it hung dull and tangled, clotted with frozen snow. Her ribs pressed sharply against her skin. One ear was torn near the tip, an old scar that spoke of fights she had survived, and beneath her body, half buried in the snow, was a small puppy. Nathan stopped the truck. The engine idled softly as he stepped out into the storm. Cold wind bit immediately through the layers of his jacket. The mother dog lifted her head. Her amber eyes locked onto him. She didn't bark, she didn't run. She simply bared her teeth. Nathan raised both hands slowly, the same calm motion he had once used with frightened civilians in war zones. "Easy," he murmured. His voice was low and steady. "I'm not here to hurt you." The puppy beneath her trembled violently. It was small, no more than 4 months old, with oversized paws and a dark coat similar to its mother's. But its breathing came in short, shallow bursts. Every few seconds, its tiny body shuddered from the cold. Nathan's heart tightened. He had seen that kind of shaking before. Not from fear, from hypothermia. The mother dog tried to stand taller, but her legs buckled slightly. She had been protecting the puppy for hours, maybe longer, using the last of her strength to shield it from the storm. For a moment, Nathan felt the old familiar war between logic and instinct. Taking them both meant risk, time, trouble, but leaving them meant death. The puppy suddenly twitched and let out a weak cry. The mother dog swayed, then she collapsed into the snow. Nathan moved instantly. He removed his heavy winter coat and wrapped it around both dogs. The mother gave a faint warning growl, but lacked the strength to resist as he lifted the bundle carefully and carried them to the truck. 30 minutes later, the truck slid to a stop outside a small veterinary clinic on the edge of Flagstaff. One fluorescent light glowed above the door. Inside waited Dr. Elena Brooks, a woman in her mid-30s with sharp hazel eyes, warm brown skin, and dark hair tied back in a loose ponytail. She was slender but carried herself with the calm confidence of someone who had spent years handling frightened animals and exhausted people. Before opening her clinic, she had worked in a military program rehabilitating injured K-9 units returning from overseas. When Nathan laid the puppy on the examination table, Elena immediately noticed something strange. "Hold on," she murmured, brushing aside the puppy's fur near its neck. There was a small surgical scar, thin, precise. Her expression changed. She grabbed a handheld scanner from the counter and passed it slowly over the puppy's neck. The machine beeped once. A string of encrypted numbers flashed across the screen. Nathan frowned. "That a microchip?" Elena stared at the display. Her face went pale. Outside the clinic window, headlights appeared through the falling snow. A black SUV rolled quietly into the parking lot. Elena looked up at Nathan, her voice barely above a whisper. "This puppy isn't just a pet." She swallowed. Someone is tracking it. The storm had quieted by morning, but the town of Flagstaff still lay under a heavy blanket of snow, the roads pale and silent beneath the gray winter sky. Inside the small veterinary clinic, the smell of antiseptic mixed with the faint warmth of electric heaters fighting the cold, creeping through the walls. Nathan Cole stood near the examination table, arms crossed, his broad shoulders rigid as he watched the small puppy sleeping under a heat lamp. Ash looked even smaller now that the snow had melted from his fur. His coat, dark sable like his mother's, was still damp, clinging to his fragile frame. Every few breaths his body trembled faintly, but the warmth had steadied his pulse. On the floor nearby, Mira lay curled protectively. Despite her exhaustion, her amber eyes remained half open, following every movement in the room. Whenever someone approached the table, her ears twitched instantly. Nathan noticed it. "That's not normal for a stray," he said quietly. Dr. Elena Brooks nodded without looking up from the computer screen. The glow of the monitor reflected in her sharp hazel eyes as lines of encrypted data scrolled across it. She had removed the chip's signal from the scanner and plugged it into a diagnostic reader she kept from her years working with military K-9 rehabilitation units. "Because she's not a stray," Elena murmured. Nathan shifted slightly, his knee stiff from the old injury that ended his service. "You're saying she's trained?" Elena glanced toward Mira. The dog immediately stiffened. To test a theory, Nathan slowly raised his hand and gave a subtle downward motion with 2 fingers, the silent command seal handlers often use to signal a K-9 to stay calm. Mira froze. Her breathing slowed. Nathan's eyes narrowed. "That's a handler response." Elena leaned back in her chair. "Exactly." She turned the screen toward him. The display showed a string of codes followed by a single word that appeared repeatedly in the encrypted data logs. "Cerberus." Nathan frowned. "Never heard of it." Elena hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as if touching something dangerous. "Most people haven't." She took a slow breath before continuing. "Cerberus was rumored about years ago in the military K-9 world. A black project, off-book. The goal was to train dogs not just for detection or patrol, but for controlled tactical pursuit. Autonomous tracking units that could operate beyond standard handler commands." Nathan's expression darkened. "You mean weaponized?" Elena nodded. "They pushed the training past normal limits. Stress conditioning, neural response experiments. genetic screening for aggression and endurance. Nathan looked at Mira again. The dog lifted her head slightly, watching him with quiet intelligence. "Does she look aggressive to you?" he asked. "No," Elena said softly. "She looks like something that escaped." Nathan walked slowly around the room, his instincts stirring uneasily. Years of combat had trained him to notice patterns others missed. That was when he realized Mira had positioned herself differently. She had moved without anyone noticing. Now she was lying directly between the door and the puppy. Guarding. Nathan stopped near the window. Through the glass he could see the snow-covered street outside. Two men stood beside the same black SUV that had arrived the night before. They wore thick winter jackets marked with the emblem of Coconino County Animal Control. But something about them felt wrong. The taller man was broad-shouldered with a square jaw and close-cropped blonde hair, the kind of haircut common in military units. His posture was too straight, too alert for a simple animal officer. The second man was thinner, with narrow eyes and a calm expression that never quite reached his face. Nathan had seen men like that before. They didn't watch buildings. They watched exits. He turned back to Elena. "They're here for the dog." Elena's face tightened. "That was fast." Nathan crouched beside Mira. The dog studied him for a long moment. Then her tail gave one cautious thump against the floor. Trust. Just a little. Nathan lowered his voice. "If Cerberus is real, then someone's going to want that puppy back." Elena swallowed. "And if Mira escaped with him," she said quietly, "then they're not here to ask nicely." Outside, the taller man reached for the clinic door. Mira's ears snapped upright. The low growl rising from her chest sounded less like fear and more like warning. Morning light crept slowly through the frosted windows of the clinic, turning the snow outside into a pale silver landscape, while tension inside the building thickened like a coming storm. Nathan Cole stood near the examination table, watching Mira carefully. The large shepherd mix had finally eaten a small bowl of food Elena placed beside her, though she still refused to move more than a few feet away from Ash. Her body remained positioned protectively between the puppy and the door, her muscles tight despite exhaustion. Trust had begun to form, but it was fragile. Dr. Elena Brooks knelt beside Mira again, carefully parting the matted fur along the dog's stomach. Elena's steady hands had spent years working with injured military K9s, and she knew how to read the quiet language of animals better than most people understood human emotion. "There's something else here," she murmured. Nathan stepped closer. Under Mira's thin fur, just beneath the skin along her lower abdomen, a faint marking appeared, almost invisible unless the light struck it from the right angle. It wasn't a scar from a fight, it was a brand, a small alphanumeric code etched into the skin like a faded tattoo. Nathan leaned closer. "That looks military." Elena nodded grimly. "Identification branding. Old-school method when they wanted permanent tracking even if chips failed." She lifted Mira's worn leather collar. The strap was cracked from age and cold, but inside one of the seams something glinted. Elena carefully cut the stitching. A tiny sliver of metal fell onto the table. It was no bigger than a grain of rice. Nathan picked it up and examined it under the lamp. "A signal shard," he said slowly. "Backup transmitter." Elena's expression darkened. Then whoever made Cerberus really didn't want these dogs disappearing. Mira suddenly raised her head. Her ears rotated toward the clinic door. Nathan noticed immediately. Something had changed in her posture. Not fear, alertness. The kind trained dogs displayed when they sensed movement long before humans did. Nathan walked to the window again. The black SUV from earlier was gone. but 2 sets of fresh tire tracks cut across the snow-covered street, leading toward the forest road outside town. Nathan studied them silently. A memory stirred in his mind, something the chip signal Elena mentioned earlier had triggered. "Let me see that shard again," he said. He pulled a small pocket flashlight from his jacket and angled the beam across the metal surface. There, a barely visible engraving, C-17 sector node. Nathan's jaw tightened. "That's a location code." Elena looked up. "You're sure?" "I've seen this format before," Nathan replied. "Field relay markers, usually used near remote facilities." Elena hesitated. "You think that's where Mira escaped from?" Nathan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he crouched beside Mira. The dog watched him calmly now, amber eyes steady and intelligent. "You ran from somewhere," he said quietly, almost as if speaking to a fellow soldier. Mira's ears twitched slightly. Nathan stood and grabbed his coat. "If this code is what I think it is, there's a place about 15 miles north in the forest. Old research facility, shut down years ago." Elena frowned. "What kind of research?" Nathan gave a humorless smile. "The kind the public never hears about." 2 hours later, Nathan's truck crawled through a narrow forest road north of Flagstaff. Snow-covered pines stretched endlessly in every direction, their tall trunks forming a silent cathedral of frozen wood. Eventually, the road ended at a rusted security gate hanging crookedly from broken hinges. Behind it stood the remains of a low concrete building half buried under snowdrifts. Nathan stepped out of the truck and approached carefully. Years of SEAL training had left instincts that never truly faded. The door had been forced open long ago. Inside, dust covered everything, but the shape of the facility was unmistakable. Metal kennels lined the walls. Broken restraints hung from steel bars. Nathan moved slowly through the hallway until he found a small control room. Most of the equipment had been destroyed, but one metal cabinet remained partly open. Inside were stacks of paper files. Nathan flipped through them until one name appeared repeatedly across multiple reports. Subject, a -09, neural adaptation trial. Status, failed. Another line beneath it froze him in place. Only surviving offspring recorded. Nathan stared at the number attached to the report. Ash's chip code. A cold realization settled in his chest. Mira hadn't just escaped. She had broken out of a place where dogs were pushed past their limits, their loyalty turned into weapons, and when the experiment declared her puppy a failure, she had carried him out into the snow rather than watch them destroy him. Nathan closed the file slowly. This was no longer about rescuing 2 animals. This was about exposing the place that created them. Night returned to the forests around Flagstaff with a deeper cold than the storm before. The tall pines standing like silent sentries beneath a pale moon that glowed faintly through drifting snow. Nathan Cole reached his cabin long after sunset, the old pickup crunching slowly over the frozen driveway. His cabin sat alone on a ridge north of town, a simple timber structure built decades earlier by a retired forest ranger. It was the kind of place chosen by men who preferred distance from the world. Nathan stepped out first, scanning the tree line automatically. Even after years away from combat, his instincts had not dulled. The forest felt wrong tonight. Too quiet. Inside the truck, Mira stirred beside the sleeping puppy. The mother dog's strength had begun to return, though one of her hind legs still trembled from the long escape through the snow. Her amber eyes watched Nathan constantly now, as if measuring him not just as a rescuer, but as a potential ally. Ash remained small and fragile, barely 4 months old. Yet something strange had begun to show in the puppy's behavior. When distant engines echoed faintly through the forest road earlier, The puppy's ears had lifted instantly, his head turning toward the sound before any human had noticed. Training memory. Nathan opened the cabin door and helped Elena inside. Dr. Elena Brooks wrapped her coat tighter around herself as she stepped into the warm light. Though calm by nature, the events of the day had shaken her. Her thoughtful hazel eyes moved constantly now, as if every shadow might contain danger. "You really think they'll come here?" she asked quietly. Nathan locked the door behind them. "If Cerberus is real," he said, "they already know where the signal stopped." He had barely finished the sentence when headlights appeared through the trees. 2 black SUVs rolled slowly into the clearing. The passenger door of the first vehicle opened. A tall man stepped out. Commander Victor Haynes moved with the confident posture of someone used to authority. He was in his early 50s, broad-shouldered, with sharp cheekbones and steel-gray hair cut short in a strict military style. A thin scar ran from his left ear to the corner of his jaw, giving his face a permanently severe expression. His eyes were pale blue and cold, the kind that studied people the way a scientist studied specimens. Haynes had spent 25 years inside classified military programs, climbing ranks through intelligence divisions that operated in silence. Those who knew him said he believed loyalty was not earned, it was engineered. Nathan opened the cabin door and stepped onto the porch before Haynes could approach. Snow crunched under their boots as the two men faced each other across the frozen yard. "You must be Nathan Cole," Haynes said calmly. His voice was smooth, almost polite. Nathan said nothing. Haynes nodded slightly toward the cabin. "You've come into possession of government property." Nathan's jaw tightened. "They're not property." Haynes gave a faint smile that never reached his eyes. "You'd be surprised how often people say that." Inside the cabin, Mira suddenly stood. Her ears flattened and a deep growl rolled from her chest. Ash lifted his head too. The puppy turned toward the back window, toward the forest behind the cabin. Then he began moving. Nathan noticed immediately. The puppy wasn't wandering randomly. Ash moved with surprising determination toward the tree line behind the cabin, his nose low, his path direct. "Elena," Nathan said quickly, "stay inside." He grabbed his rifle from beside the door and followed the dogs into the snow. Mira moved beside him despite the injury in her leg. Her body tense but fearless, Ash continued forward through the white pines until they reached a narrow clearing where an old metal tower stood half buried in snow. Nathan recognized it instantly. A signal relay node. Ash stopped beside the base of the tower and began scratching at the snow. Nathan knelt and brushed away the ice. Beneath it was a sealed metal container built directly into the ground. Inside it, a small encrypted drive blinked faintly. Backup data. Cerberus records. But before Nathan could remove it, the forest erupted with gunfire. Searchlights cut through the trees as Haynes's men surrounded the clearing. Nathan moved instantly, pulling Elena behind the tower. His SEAL instincts took over. Angles, cover, movement. Mira lunged forward with a ferocious snarl, intercepting Haynes just as the commander stepped towards the puppy. The two collided in the snow. For a moment, chaos ruled the clearing. Shouting, gunfire, the storm rising again. Then distant sirens echoed through the mountains. Local police. Haynes looked toward the sound and gave a short signal to his men. "Erase it," he said, coldly. Seconds later, the tower behind Nathan exploded in a violent burst of fire and metal. The encrypted drive vanished in the blast. When the smoke cleared, the Cerberus evidence was gone. And the truth Nathan had just uncovered had been buried beneath the snow once again. Dawn came quietly to the mountains outside Flagstaff. the snow-covered forest glowing faintly gold beneath the rising sun, as if the long night had finally loosened its grip on the land. The clearing where the relay tower had stood was now a black scar in the white snow. Smoke still drifted upward from the twisted metal scattered across the ground. Nathan Cole stood at the edge of the wreckage, the cold air biting his lungs while distant police sirens echoed along the mountain road. Behind him, Mira lay in the snow beside Ash. The mother dog was breathing heavily after the fight, but her eyes remained alert, scanning the forest with the quiet vigilance of a soldier who had survived too many battles to trust silence. Ash, small and trembling but alive, pressed against her side. Nathan turned as Elena stepped toward him, holding the small scanner device in her gloved hands. Her face looked pale but determined. "Something survived the blast," she said quietly. Nathan frowned. Elena knelt beside Ash and carefully passed the scanner along the puppy's neck again. The device beeped sharply, a faint digital pulse echoing through the frozen air. "The chip wasn't just a tracker," she said. "It's storing encrypted data internally." Nathan's eyes narrowed. "How much?" Elena hesitated before answering. "Enough to destroy Cerberus." They returned to the cabin while police officers secured the forest clearing. Within hours, Elena had connected the chip to a decoding program on her laptop. The screen filled with rows of hidden files that had remained dormant until the signal tower was destroyed. Shipping manifests, experiment logs, personnel rosters. Nathan leaned closer as Elena opened one of the deeper archives. Inside were recordings of neurological experiments performed on dogs, behavioral stress conditioning, genetic aggression trials, and training protocols that pushed animals beyond normal limits. Mira's identification code appeared several times in the files. So did Ash's, but one file stood apart from the rest. A complete backup archive labeled Cerberus Command Authorization. Nathan closed the laptop slowly. That's enough to bury them, but exposing it required someone who could not be intimidated or silenced. Nathan knew exactly one person. 3 days later, he drove south to Phoenix to meet Special Agent Daniel Rourke. Rourke was a tall, lean man in his late 40s with sharp green eyes and dark hair streaked with gray at the temples. A faint scar crossed his chin, a souvenir from a hostage rescue operation years earlier when Nathan had pulled him out of a collapsing compound overseas. Since then, Rourke had risen through the ranks of federal investigations, becoming known as a relentless investigator who had once dismantled an illegal weapons network that reached deep into military contractors. When Nathan placed the encrypted drive on the table between them, Rourke studied it silently for a long moment. "You're sure about this?" he asked. Nathan nodded once. Rourke exhaled slowly. "Then this isn't just a case," he said. "It's a storm." The investigation exploded within weeks. Federal agents raided several hidden facilities connected to the Cerberus program. Classified documents surfaced. Testimonies from former staff confirmed what the files showed: an illegal project that had turned loyal animals into experimental weapons. Commander Victor Haynes was arrested during a midnight operation outside Denver. The Cerberus program was officially shut down. Months later, spring arrived in Flagstaff. Nathan stood on the edge of a wide fenced field outside his cabin, watching several dogs run freely across the grass. Some were retired service animals. Others had been rescued from neglect or abandonment. The small sanctuary had begun quietly, funded partly by donations from veterans who understood the bond between soldier and dog. Mira rested beneath the shade of the porch, her once thin frame now strong again. Her amber eyes followed Ash as the young dog raced across the field chasing drifting leaves. Ash had grown quickly. His coat had thickened into the rich sable colors of his mother, and the scar on his neck had faded after Elena safely removed the chip. The puppy who had once been marked as a failed experiment now ran with the carefree energy of a dog who had finally discovered what freedom meant. Nathan leaned against the porch railing, watching them. For years, he had believed courage meant charging into danger. But now he understood something different. Sometimes the bravest creature in the world wasn't the one who fought the hardest. Sometimes it was simply a mother who refused to abandon her child, even when the entire world tried to hunt them down. Some stories don't end with explosions or arrests. Some end with something quieter, something closer to a miracle. That winter night in the mountains, a broken Navy SEAL, a wounded mother dog, and a tiny puppy marked by human cruelty crossed paths in the middle of a snowstorm. Logic would say none of them should have survived. But sometimes, when the world grows cold, something greater guides lost souls toward each other. Maybe miracles don't always come as thunder from the sky. Sometimes they arrive on four tired paws, carrying hope through the snow. Mira didn't know about courage or heroism. She only knew one thing. A mother protects her child, even if the world becomes her enemy. And in doing so, she reminded a man who had seen war that love can still win where power fails. Perhaps that is how God works in our lives. Not always through grand signs, but through quiet moments, through loyalty, compassion, and the courage to care when it would be easier to walk away. If this story touched your heart, take a moment today to show kindness to someone, human or animal, who may need it. You never know when you might become the answer to someone's silent prayer. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Share this story with someone who believes that miracles still happen. And if you believe that God sometimes sends hope through the most unexpected protectors, subscribe to the channel so we can keep sharing stories like this together. May God bless you, protect your family, and bring warmth to every heart watching tonight.